There tend to be these moments along this journey where I assume I'm not unique in this, where people have really significant breakthroughs in beliefs. And it's mostly that a belief gets shattered.
Yeah.
Again, this is, I think, one of the real joys of having a journal is you can kind of go back and read what that was like and read, you know, on this day, like through this exercise, this really profound thing happened. I mean, I wrote about two of them in that last chapter of my book. I wrote about one at the bridge and one about PCS that were undoubtedly the two biggest breakthroughs in beliefs I've ever had in my life. They've had a far greater impact on anything in my world. And they both happened in an instant, right? Like they were huge step function changes in a radical belief system. And what I find interesting about it is how much easier it became to make any change after the fact. I never want to represent that I'm better. We're all in recovery here. But when I think about the December 2017, April of 2020, or maybe it was by this point, May of 2020, those particular days when those things happened, I mean, literally within an instant, I don't understand the neurobiology of how it happens, but something really switches, and I never look at the world the same way I did before. There's an immediate acceptance of something typically. That's the shattering of the belief system, is the acceptance of something that is more honest and more genuine to the more close to the innate child that we all were. Is that common, first of all, that people have these major sort of life-changing appreciations of something? And then secondly, is that by itself sufficient sometimes to drive change?
I'd be careful with the common word, but it happens a lot. And I typically hear about it kind of the way you described it, months, even sometimes years later, right? Like it hit me one day, or this thing was happening and I was incredibly compelled to do it the old way, and I heard something so-and-so said in my ear, you know, or something against that belief system. And that's what's so tricky about that process at the bridge, or if you want to talk about experiential journeys, using experiential therapies. I mean, just going to a group therapy process, residential, is an experiential intervention, right? And so to be able to put my finger on, well, what was it? You know, what exactly was it? You know, and can I prove that was the thing? Like, it's hard to do.
It's interesting. For me, in both cases, it came down to a therapist pushing very hard, but very kindly against a set of assumptions. It was me saying something, offering it up, the same answer, and the person saying, what about this? What about this? What about that? You know, and just maybe describe it as a loving confrontation.
Yeah.
That when fully backed into a corner in an unthreatening way, collapsed the scaffolding of a mental model.
Yeah. And thank God. I mean, that's when you tell that about putting your finger on that, like, I've got so much gratitude sitting here, you know. I mean, obviously I know the moments, you know, I know several of the moments. And, you know, it is common. I think the spirit of you in this example is putting yourself in a position for it to happen. And there being a process to get this guarded version of self out of the way enough to allow something like that to happen, right? And there's a lot going on to create that, or to cultivate that possibility.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely maybe the lesson I would want somebody to learn from this is, in science, there's an expression that I think it was Louis Pasteur that said that, chance favors the prepared mind. And the idea is that great scientific breakthroughs don't just happen. They happen to people who are toiling in the lab, failing, trying again, constantly thinking about the problem. And yes, usually something lucky happens that trips them in the direction of a discovery. It's often very much an accident. But that accident can't happen if you're not on the field.
Absolutely.
That accident doesn't happen if you're in the stands.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's the takeaway I would want somebody to have here, which is you're very unlikely to have that eureka moment if you're not mired in the trenches of going through the painful work of figuring out your story, understanding, trying to create the map of what's happening. It's unlikely to happen when you're continuing the distractions or the numbing behaviors.
Right. Absolutely. And to speak to just, sometimes I guess the frustration with in the individual one-on-one therapeutic dynamic would be, or, I've heard a lot of therapists many of the therapists who would ask the question, why would somebody go to a residential program that wasn't an addict or alcoholic? Like, you talk about the frustrations of like the goals, not being able to put the knowing into acting. Like, I see this person, we have 4 steps forward. We have this great 55-minute session, right? And then 6 days later, they come back and I'm like, who the hell is this? What happened to them, right? Well, what happened to them is, more than likely, they went back and lived underneath the same roof with their biggest trauma trigger.
Yeah.
Right. And so, in your experience and many others, having the ability to get that, that separation, if you will, that season of separation to make that possible. Not the only way to make that possible, because again, we paint ourselves in a hole to where, if I can't go to a residential program, I can't heal. Right. We certainly don't want to paint that, because then we've got a lot of folks without hope. Right. But one of the ways, absolutely.
And do you view your work today, the work you do just with individual clients, as something that you prefer to only do with people once they're coming out of a residential program?